Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People Policy Institute's Inside Analysis of the State of Affairs in Israel and the Jewish World. On today's episode, we have a special guest, the Chief Rabbi of South Africa, Rabbi Warren Goldstein. And we're talking to Rabbi Goldstein because, in addition to being the leader of a significant and large and influential Jewish community in South Africa, and one of the larger Jewish communities around the world, Rabbi Goldstein has been taking a very strong position against his government over its ties with Hamas, over its support of Hamas, and over the charge that it brought against Israel, taking Israel to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ at The Hague, over charges of genocide. Rabbi Goldstein, it's great to have you with us.
Yaakov, thank you so much. So nice to talk to you again.
So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. And firstly, I just want to, before we dive into the legal issues and some of the more thorny issues, let's just touch briefly. What's the mood like for Jews today in South Africa? How are things? Big community in Johannesburg. There's a nice sized community in Cape Town and some other places throughout the country, but those are the two primary communities. What's it like there? Because we hear a lot of other communities around the world under siege, fears of walking around without a kippah, anti-Semitism, very blatant. We've seen some cases of this, but what's the mood like just for the general average Jew?
Tell you what has been a devastating blow for the community from an emotional, psychological point of view, and a spiritual point of view as well, is the South African government, the ANC government's anti-Israel position. That the ANC government, and I don't like to refer to it as South Africa, it's the ANC government who has been one of the leading anti-Israel forces in the world. And for a proudly Zionistic Jewish community, that is something that causes outrage. It's something which causes deep upset. As a Jewish community, for us, our connection to Israel and our pride in the state of Israel is something that goes to the very depth of Jewish identity in South Africa. And to have a government so publicly attacking the state of Israel is something which has upset the community deeply on a profound sense. It's not just, well, okay, we're just a bit upset or irritated or angry. It's profoundly upsetting. But if you contrast that, it's very interesting, and it sort of tells a story. The day-to-day life for the Jewish community, walking in the streets, you don't experience anti-Semitism in the streets. People walk around, men walk around with kippot. There's on Shabbat, there has been an increase of incidents, but when you compare it to global standards, South Africa historically has always had amongst the lowest rates of recorded anti-Semitic incidents of any community in the world, and it continues that record, thank God. And even since October 7, relatively speaking, compared to what other communities have been going through, it's been very quiet on that front, thank God. There have been Jewish businesses that have been targeted by BDS activists. And again, there's a big discrepancy here between the population of South Africa, the ordinary South Africans, your average citizen, versus the activists and versus the ANC. Because remember, South Africa has a population of 60 million. Of those 60 million, more than 59 million are Christians, less than 500,000 Muslims. Jewish community, 55,000. So we're a small in number in that context, but impact on the country is large. But actually, of those Christians, most are from evangelical churches, very similar to what you would know from the United States, and therefore there is a natural sympathy and support for
despite the political level. Interesting. Yes. But because of the politics, though, you early on in this conflict, you decided to change or amend or rewrite. I think it was mid-October. You rewrote the prayer that you usually say on Shabbat in synagogues. We know this from around the world, right? Whether if you're a Jewish community in Canada or in the United States or in the UK or, of course, in South Africa, we have a prayer for the state of Israel, and there's a prayer also for the local government. And you decided to amend that prayer because of the ANC support for Hamas. What was that about?
Yes, so the amendment was that the previous version of the prayer, which had actually the draft of it, I inherited from my predecessor, Chief Rabbi Cyril Harris of blessed memory. We began saying this prayer from 1994 with the advent of freedom and democracy in South Africa. And what I removed from the prayer, the previous draft of the prayer, was that we pray for the president, the deputy president, the members of the government, and then the people of South Africa. And so what I did was I removed reference to the government, so that we would pray then only for the people of South Africa, no mention of the president, deputy president, or the members of the government. And that was done, as you said, sort of mid-October, when I saw that President Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC government came out, literally, guns blazing in favor of Hamas, that in their public statements, within a week of October 7, even before any Israeli action, defensive action had been taken, they were already saying you have to see October 7 in the context of 75 years of occupation. Horrific, morally repugnant statements. The South African Foreign Minister, Naledi Pandor, then flew to Tehran within a week or so of October 7 to have meetings with them. She had telephone calls with the top leadership of Hamas. Just outrageous behavior, morally repugnant, and just felt that there's no way that we can in good conscience pray for the welfare and the blessing of a government such as this. And so I removed them from the prayer.
Why do you think that there is this? I mean, it's interesting what you mentioned, because, and I want to get into the ICJ, and you also have background as a lawyer and international lawyer. So we, it's interesting. You could talk about halacha, you could talk about civil rights, human rights, and law. So we have a lot to potentially talk about. But you mentioned that a lot of the South African people are these evangelicals who are actually supportive of Israel, but you have at that government layer, really, I mean, staunch support of Hamas, the recalling of their ambassador. You referred to them at one point as useful idiots of Iran, right? The government, because of, after they decided to recall the ambassador and diplomatic staff to back to South Africa, or maybe there wasn't an ambassador. I don't remember exactly what the status was at the time, but all the diplomatic staff, basically. Why is there this deep connection with the Iranians? Why is there this deep connection with Hamas?
Yeah, I think there are two things which are driving it. There's an element of ideology. There is an element of ideology. One can't exclude that. Like, say, for example, Jeremy Corbyn had won that election in the UK. Then you would probably find the UK at the ICJ taking Israel, on charges of genocide. I mean, in fact, he joined the South African.
He was there, right? He was at The Hague, actually. Yeah.
Yes, to support the South African application. If if AOC became the president of the United States, you could foresee in some sort of world that she would probably do the same. There is an ideology which is a left ideology that really has a problem with Western values, with United States, with Israel, with freedom and democracy. There's an ideological issue there. But actually over here, it is about the financial ties and the political ties between Iran and South Africa, which go back many years. And also one has to see in context of the South African foreign policy connected to that. South African foreign policy under this government has seen an approachment to and a linking with the thug nations of the world, China, Russia, Iran. It's all part of a particular, which to me is such a betrayal of the South African Constitution, because remember this, South Africa, as you know, and I mean, you visited South Africa and you've seen it for yourself. It is a vibrant free democracy with an independent judiciary, with a robust free press, and regular, transparent elections. And so for a democracy like South Africa to be associated with Russia, China, and Iran is such a betrayal of those constitutional values that it's outrageous.
And when you think about it, to some extent, there used to be better ties, between government. I mean, part of it comes from the fact that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the government looks at Israel, that fits into this apartheid narrative to some extent, and there's a lot of disappointment or anger at Israel because of the relations that we had with the apartheid government of South Africa many years ago? Or is there more to it here?
You know, as regard to those connections from years back, I mean, it's worthy of of a proper discussion and to understand all of the facts. But it's very important to note that Israel's at many times in the United Nations voted against apartheid South Africa, voted to condemn apartheid South Africa. And when you measure sort of Israel's conduct versus many other countries in the world, it doesn't stand out. I mean, even some, Saudi Arabia, many of the Arab nations, and United States, United Kingdom, there were, but again, Israel did publicly take stands strongly against apartheid South Africa. So I know that sometimes that is used against Israel.
Right. I mean, I'm saying at the government level, I know that I've heard that among South Africans, and you see it in the media, and it's in columns, and people write it, and they flaunt that. Yeah.
It's unfair. It's unfair. And as well as, the use of this apartheid word against Israel, it's something which I take particular offense to, as many do. But I say that firstly, as someone who grew up in the final years of the apartheid system in South Africa. I mean, I was born in 1971. Freedom and democracy came to South Africa in 1994. So I saw apartheid in those years firsthand. And I know Israel, I visit Israel, as you know, many times in the year. I know it deeply, I know both countries deep. There is nothing in Israel.
Yeah, of course not. Yeah.
And it's important to state it because, when people, when our enemies keep repeating the lie of apartheid, occupation, genocide, they keep on repeating these things as, Goebbels did, understanding that the more you repeat a lie, the more that people, are likely to believe it. It's important. So I think in a certain sense, what's driving everything from the South African point of view is this connection to Iran and Hamas and Qatar. Qatar is playing a very poisonous role in so much of what happens in global politics. And it's not just South Africa, but we know that Qatari money funds, the Brookings Institute, Georgetown University, all of the people who are going into American government. There is a strategic ploy which is being made. There's a battlefield that is against Israel. It's not just the fields of Gaza. It's being fought in all of these different planes.
100%. And I mean, apartheid, there's that Jewish comedian actor, Michael Rappaport, who people might be familiar with. He's a bit foul-mouthed, but he actually tweeted yesterday, "I'm here in Jerusalem. I'm looking for the apartheid. Can someone point to me where it is? Because I can't find it." Rabbi Goldstein, let's talk about the ICJ. So based on what you're explaining, South Africa, being the so-called useful idiots of the Iranians, they decide to take Israel to the ICJ with the genocide charge, which is ridiculous in of itself. When we don't have to necessarily talk about the merits of the case, because I think we all can agree that it's absurd. But this is a huge escalation for Israel, right? To be brought before a court. And I know that you had a lot of grave concerns about what it means legalistically for Israel, diplomatically, of course. What were your feelings about that?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned before, that apart from my rabbinic background, I have a PhD in law, and my area of my thesis was in human rights law and in constitutional law, and trying to understand these things. And I think what I learned from that thesis and from my research is that for a judicial forum to be defined as such, that this is really a court of law, it needs a lot of it goes to who appoints it and what is its level of independence and what kind of framework of law does it function within. And so therefore, the ICJ ultimately is a body of the United Nations. It has as much credibility, in my opinion, as UNRWA or any one of the other United Nations institutions. That's what it is. It is appointed by the majority of members of the General Assembly, granted with rights of veto from Security Council. But ultimately, it is an appointed body of the United Nations. And the majority of members of the member countries of the United Nations are not democratic. And so what you have here, and this to me is a national security threat, not only to the state of Israel, but to any functioning democracy in the world, when non-democratic countries can control an institution that has the legal authority and the political authority to summons a democracy and to sit in judgment over the democracy's right to self-defense. That is an untenable situation with regards to the national security of the free world. How can Israel's right to self-defense be adjudicated by a body of the United Nations? And what precedent does that set for the United States, for the United Kingdom? And so the non-democratic nations, Russia, China, Iran, are using the global network of these international law bodies to weaken democracies, because everybody knows this: Israel has the firepower to win this war and all of its wars, but it is being held back by the politics of what is going on in the world, and therefore it's a national security threat. So my own opinion is that, you know, the Israel should walk from the ICJ. It does not have the legal or moral legitimacy to function as a court because of who appoints it.
But if we walk, what does that mean? I mean, right now we have these interim rulings. We have to present them with reports. I mean, they could obviously still find Israel in violation of the Genocide Convention. So we're not yet completely in the clear, and this has wide ramifications. I mean, right now, for example, we're just seeing the very small in scope, but potentially wide in numbers in the future. Some of the sanctions that the United States has imposed on so-called settler violence. Now the UK has followed, France has followed, which has its own absurdity, because what they're trying to do is make a moral equivalency between sporadic fringe elements of Israeli society and a state-run terrorist actor like Hamas. But putting that aside, this is lawfare. This is what Israel's facing.
Yeah, well, I think part of what we need to do, and you know, I think this is a task both for the Israeli government and the Jewish world, and all people who believe in true freedom and democracy, is to make the argument to the United States, to the United Kingdom, and other democracies that what is needed now is a new world order. What I mean by that is we need a global institution that only allows democracies as its members. And that institution needs to begin to rival the United Nations. They don't have to walk out of the United Nations, but they should be kept in their box. The United Nations, the UN, with UNRWA, you know, and all of its credibility in tatters, should be placed where it belongs, as a talk shop. But the real work needs to get done within an affiliation and an association of democracies, because the alternative is too dangerous. You know, what the practical implications for Israel now in ICJ, you know, obviously the politicians and the government will understand what that means for the procurement of weapons and other kinds of things. But I'm saying the long term, this is not something that could be solved in this particular application, but the long-term national security of the state of Israel and of the free world depends on freeing itself from these corrupt institutions that are controlled by dictatorships. This is really a battle between the free world and dictatorships. That alignment between Russia, Iran, and China is an alignment of dictatorships against the free world. And we need to understand what is at stake. And the United States needs to understand, the Biden administration needs to understand that what it forces Israel to do today is what the United States is going to be forced to do tomorrow. So one has to be very careful, because ultimately this is a test case for a democracy fighting and with its right to self-defense.
Do you think, Rabbi Goldstein, that it's possible to rehabilitate the relations between Israel and the ANC or a future government in South Africa?
Well, I'll tell you this. The ANC is a waning force in South Africa. There are elections coming this year. Opinion polls are now putting it at 40%. You know, the previous election, it was around 53, 54%, and it's falling. Its support levels in urban areas is now 30%. The ANC government has not only betrayed Israel, it has betrayed the people of South Africa through its incompetence and its corruption. And the people of South Africa are so much better than our government. The people of South Africa have a resilience. There are many people of faith, of good values, of a sense of of many who have a positive connection to Israel and indeed to much of what happens in Western democracies. Many opinion polls show that most South Africans, the vast majority, if they were choosing a place for their children, apart from South Africa, it would be in the West. It would be in the US, UK, Germany, not in Russia and China and these places that this government. So actually, I strongly believe, and this is what, that there is a bright future for relations between Israel and South Africa, not with the ANC government. That the ANC is beyond redemption, but between the people of South Africa, the future South African government, and the state of Israel. And I think the state of Israel should play the long game here. This is not about today and tomorrow. 3 to 5 years, things in South Africa are going to look very different, and the state of Israel needs to be ready for those changes that come in the future.
We look forward. And Rabbi Goldstein, I want to let you go, but before I do, give us some hope. How can we be hopeful at a time of where there's great despair? You look at what's happening. Unfortunately, still the war ongoing, hostages still being held in Gaza. We did have the rescue of those two, which was incredible, Fernando and Luis this week, but still 134. As we're recording this, still Hamas leadership alive. The diplomatic isolation, the lawfare. Where do you find hope these days, Rabbi?
In two things. Firstly, number one, and I know this sounds counterintuitive to say, but I believe that the state of Israel is safer today than it was on October 6th, because we at least know the enemy and we know the threats. That's number one. Our eyes are open. Number two, I'll tell you, to me, it is about the Israeli people. I was in Israel just last week, and Firstly, I brought a box load of letters from the children in our primary schools in South Africa, Jewish primary schools, more than 1,000 letters, which I distributed to soldiers, those in Tel HaShomer Hospital and in the rehab units, as well as those out on the front lines at some of the rest stations near the Gaza border. And firstly, the warmth of the letters, the warmth of the reception from the soldiers, but the spirit of wounded soldiers who have months ahead and sometimes longer of rehab, but the heroism of Israelis. I spoke to families of hostages. I found Israel on this trip. There was obviously a somber atmosphere and sometimes almost a sense of sadness, which I've never known Israel to have. But at the same time, resilience, strength, heroism. To my mind, as I was walking through the streets, of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and meeting with people, in every walk of life, and soldiers and government ministers and all, from every different part of Israeli society, had a deep sense of the heroism and the resilience of the spirit and the sense of national purpose. And I found the spirit of Israel to be strong. And I can say, together with that, Jews in the diaspora, spirit is strong. We know Jews in the diaspora have endured an unbelievably painful wave of anti-Semitism globally. But we are strong and firm and resilient. And when one looks at Am Yisrael as the Jewish people across the world, with a strong, vibrant, independent Jewish state at our center, and strong, vibrant diaspora communities living in free democracies who are powerful advocates for Zionism and for the people of Israel and for the state of Israel. And you look at that together with many allies that we have in the free world, the United States, UK, in South Africa, all over. We've got a long, hard path ahead and many enemies, but we have, with God's blessings, incredible gifts. And I think we can go forward into the future with resilience, with strength, and I believe confidence, please God.
Be'ezrat Hashem, please God. Rabbi Warren Goldstein, I want to thank you for joining us. And I want to thank our viewers and listeners for joining another episode of the JPPI's Inside Analysis, where you can catch us on Mondays and Thursdays. In the meantime, to all everyone, have a safe and Shabbat Shalom.